Hello everyone and welcome to The No Show. I'll be your host Nathan Orenstein and today I'm going to be reviewing Michael. Michael is written by John Logan, directed by Antoine Fuqua, and stars Jaafar Jackson, Colman, Domingo, Nia Long, and Juliano Valdi. It follows the life of Michael Jackson from the rise of the Jackson 5 in the 60s to the Bad Tour in 1988. Here we go, the Michael Jackson biopic. Michael Jackson is probably the most famous musician to ever walk the earth, but he's also one of the most controversial figures in pop culture history. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I absolutely love Michael Jackson's music. Thriller in particular is an album I listen to at least once a month, and even growing up, my dad would show me the Thriller music video every Halloween. But I also grew up in the 2000s, a time characterized by the child abuse allegations, the This Is It tour that never happened, and obviously his world-shaking death in 2009. He was the biggest artist in the world for years and years, and it's easy to understand why so many people love him and why his fan base is still so strong even after all these years. But it's just as easy to understand why so many people want nothing to do with him and why they only view him as a predator. For me, I still do love the music, but you're never going to catch me trying to defend him or discredit any of his accusers. He is an exceptionally complicated person to talk about, and I was extremely curious to see how a Michael Jackson biopic could possibly capture the king of pop at the height of his powers and all of his undoings in a singular film. Well, to put it simply, it doesn't. In fact, what I've presented in the last minute or so is a more nuanced picture of Michael Jackson than this movie has any interest in depicting. Let's address the elephant in the room right off the bat. Michael does not address any of the abuse allegations whatsoever. The first abuse allegation was raised in 1993, and the film sidesteps this by ending in 1988. Simple enough excuse. But the film had originally intended to end in 1993, and the entire third act was eventually scrapped because of legal issues with presenting this aspect of the story. So basically, they scrubbed the movie clean. And not just of the abuse allegations either. They sort of reference the painkillers that he would later become dependent on, and they sort of mention the vitiligo that would eventually lead to him completely changing his skin color, but neither are really presented as major parts of his life. In fact, I couldn't really tell you anything about Michael Jackson after watching this film. His notoriously abusive father and manager, Joseph Jackson, is a persistent force that Michael must contend with throughout the film, but that's really the only personal detail you're going to get about him. The movie isn't interested in Michael Jackson the person, only in Michael Jackson the artist. But even then, you don't really get any insight into his creative process, or even any of his iconic looks or dance moves that he's so synonymous with. So the movie's not really interested in Michael Jackson the artist either, mainly just in Michael Jackson the performer, or Michael Jackson the spectacle. Anything interesting about him, both good and bad, has been completely sanded down to give the bare minimum story needed to essentially deliver a compilation of his greatest hits. Here's the thing though, those greatest hits are still some of the best pop songs ever recorded, and watching them being performed in a movie like this is still entertaining. I also think that Jaafar Jackson, who is actually Michael's nephew, captures him extremely well, not only in his personality and way of carrying himself, but especially in the performances and the dancing. The primary focus, apparently, of this film is recreating some of Jackson's performances as closely as they can, whether it's from live concerts or his music videos. And I do think the film succeeds at that, with Jaafar Jackson being the true engine that this film runs on. I also have to give credit to Juliano Valdi, though, who plays Michael as a child, getting his start with the Jackson 5. This is definitely a smaller portion of the film, but Valdi truly steals the show in every way imaginable and is clearly a kid that was born to perform. When I think back on the movie, the scenes of Valdi performing as the lead singer of the Jackson 5 are honestly the ones that stick out in my head the most, and the energy and charisma he brought to each of these scenes was so much fun to watch. For as mediocre and uninteresting as literally everything in between was, the performance scenes were entertaining enough for me to enjoy this movie more than I didn't. But there's still just so many problems with this film. Structurally, it's a disaster. It's a hodgepodge of events from Michael's life, broken up by performances that happened in roughly the same time period as said event. You know those Viewmaster toys where you look through it to see a picture and then you click the trigger and it cycles to the next image? That's pretty much what watching this movie feels like. It's a series of random, mostly unconnected scenes and events that you click through with each song. There are huge swaths of time that are just skipped over for no apparent reason, and other big chunks of the film that are focused on for way too long. In other words, the pacing sucks. The dialogue is also painfully generic, never really evoking any sort of emotional response, and serving as exposition for probably 90% of the film. I already mentioned how the edges were sanded off the story, but the same can be said for the dialogue as well. The writing in general is just as mediocre as it gets. The movie also has this weird, artificial corporate sheen to everything, and the CGI in particular is especially rough in the few scenes where it's kind of the center of attention. You also noticed I haven't mentioned director Antoine Fuqua once, and that's because there's nothing to mention here. He competently captures what needs to be captured, but there's no flavor or style to any of this. And finally, the film ends with a black screen with white text that simply says, "His story continues." They are sequel baiting with music biopics now, apparently. Good luck with that sequel, by the way, featuring multiple legal cases that you apparently don't have the rights to depict, and also lacking the vast majority of his massive hits because they're already used in this film. I genuinely laughed out loud when those words hit the screen. Probably the most egregious way you could possibly end a film like this. As you can tell, Michael is an incredibly frustrating film. Sure, it's a fun enough time if you enjoy Michael Jackson's music and seeing him dance. There is plenty of that here, and if that's all you're looking for, you're gonna walk away happy. If you want literally anything else out of this, you're out of luck. This is perhaps the single most generic music biopic we've ever gotten, and that's saying something considering they're really kind of all starting to bleed together at this point. But for me to be saying that about a movie about Michael Jackson of all people, it just doesn't make any sense. Luckily, the movie's commitment to extreme mediocrity saves this from falling any lower, but I'm still going to be giving it a 5 out of 10. If you enjoyed the review, then feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. And if you've seen Michael already, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. I've been Nathan Orenstein with The No Show. Thanks for watching.